Chapter 7. As Jeanette busied herself with her demands and frustrations in the Sapphire Palace, Athanasia quietly adjusted to her new role in the main palace, much to the surprise of the court. After the debutante ball, where the sheltered princess had finally made her appearance, the whispers around the palace changed. Gone was the princess who had never been seen or heard from, replaced by a young woman who seemed more like a secretary than royalty, quietly and efficiently shadowing her father, Emperor Claude. Athanasia had shed her opulent gowns for something far more practical, an understated academia-style dress, simple and neat in dark, muted colors. It was a sharp contrast to the flowing, ornate gowns she had once been expected to wear. The dress looked almost like a uniform, with its crisp lines and modest cut, and yet, in its simplicity, it gave her a presence of authority. The gown was adorned only with subtle, delicate embroidery, almost as if it were made specifically to fit the new role she had assumed beside her father. The emperor, always dressed in his signature white casual Roman robe, exuded the same confident yet relaxed air as usual. His robe was open at the chest, revealing his broad shoulders and the casual nature of his appearance. His golden blonde hair caught the light as he leaned forward at his desk, sorting through a pile of papers. Athanasia, with her platinum blonde hair styled simply in a low, neat bun, sat beside him, her expression calm and composed. Her blue crystal eyes, like her father's, scanned the documents in front of her, her pen poised as she made quick, precise notes. Every so often, the emperor would glance at his daughter, nodding as she confirmed or clarified certain points, taking the role of an efficient assistant with a calm confidence that surprised even the oldest court officials. It was clear to everyone who saw them together that Athanasia was not just by her father's side for show, she was contributing, actively involved in the day-to-day workings of the empire. In one of the many meetings held in the imperial court, the emperor gestured to the stack of documents before them. "I trust you have reviewed these, Athanasia?" he asked, his tone casual but carrying an undercurrent of respect. Athanasia nodded silently, her voice clear and steady as she replied, "Yes, father. I've made notes on the proposals. Some will require further discussion, but others can be signed off immediately." She slid the documents across to him, her handwriting neat and precise. The nobles in the room exchanged surprised glances. The princess, once so distant, now had an air of competence that made her seem far older than her years. They had expected her to remain a figurehead, but here she was, actively engaging in the affairs of the empire, her work ethic drawing admiration from the court. A nobleman, clearly taken aback, couldn't help but comment, "Her Highness is more diligent than I expected. I had heard rumors of her private studies, but to see it in action, impressive." Another noble, a lady-in-waiting, quietly whispered to her companion, "I never imagined the princess would take such an active role. I always thought she'd simply join social gatherings when the time came." "When do you think she'll make her public debut?" "Perhaps," said another lady, "she's waiting until her father is ready to pass the torch. She doesn't seem interested in the usual royal events." Athanasia, having overheard the whispers, didn't react. Instead, she continued her work as though the opinions of the court didn't matter. She was focused, not on society's expectations of her, but on something far more important, the running of the empire, alongside her father. Her quiet determination was beginning to earn her the respect of the court, even as she remained an enigma. Later that day, as the nobles left the meeting room, murmuring to one another about the princess's surprising role, Emperor Claude turned to his daughter with a rare, approving smile. "You did well today, Athanasia." Athanasia glanced up from her notes, her blue eyes meeting his. She offered a small, polite smile. "Thank you, father. It's the least I can do." Claude's gaze softened slightly, though he quickly masked it with his usual imperious expression. "You've come a long way." Athanasia nodded, though her focus remained on the next document in front of her. She didn't need the approval of others to know what she was capable of, she had her father's trust, and that was all that mattered. The whispers of the nobles no longer fazed her, not when she had a far grander purpose to fulfill. As she continued to work beside her father, As the days passed, Athanasia became more settled in her role at court, her presence now fully integrated into the palace's daily routines. She had quickly proven herself invaluable, taking part in meetings and assisting with documents, her sharp mind earning the respect of the nobles and courtiers. But while Athanasia immersed herself in state matters, Felix and Lillian, her ever-watchful guardians, noticed that the young princess was growing weary from the demands of court life. One afternoon, after another long string of meetings with her father, Lillian, with a gentle yet concerned tone, spoke up. "Your Majesty, if I may, the princess has been working diligently without respite. She's been fully absorbed in court duties for days now." She hesitated, carefully choosing her words. It might be good for her to step back for a while and mingle with high society, take a break, and engage in social gatherings. Felix, who had been observing Athanasia's focus, nodded in agreement. "Indeed, Your Majesty. It would be beneficial for her to spend some time with her peers, those who will take active roles in court in the near future. She'll need to know them, and they need to know her." The Emperor, Claude, didn't immediately respond. His eyes narrowed slightly as he considered their suggestion. He valued his daughter's hard work and discipline, but also recognized that part of court life was socializing, building connections with others. Though he didn't see the need for her to bow to the whims of nobility, he eventually relented, though with clear conditions. After a long pause, Claude sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Very well, but with one condition: no boys. I won't have my daughter surrounded by young men who might have ulterior motives." Felix and Lillian froze, the weight of the Emperor's words sinking in. They exchanged uneasy glances, but neither dared to question his decision directly. The Emperor's protective instincts were well known, especially when it came to his daughter. "Your Majesty, of course," Felix said, his voice steady, though his mind raced with the realization of how restrictive this rule would be for Athanasia. Lillian bowed her head in agreement but remained silent, already imagining how the princess would react to such a condition. Athanasia, who had been listening quietly from the side, finally spoke up, her voice surprisingly light, though a hint of amusement danced in her eyes. "No boys? That's your condition?" Her lips curled slightly, a faint smile playing at the edges of her mouth. The princess's thoughts drifted to her previous life, where no invitations had ever come her way. Back then, she had been the girl nobody cared to invite. Now, however, it seemed as though everyone was vying for her attention. The sudden surge of invitations felt both absurd and strange, as though she were stepping into a new world entirely. She glanced at Lillian, who had been holding a stack of documents. "How many invitations did Jeanette get?" Athanasia asked suddenly, her voice curious, but with a touch of wry amusement. She had heard whispers of the other princess's social standing, but had never paid it much mind. Lillian blinked in surprise at the question. I'm not sure, Princess," she answered. "I know she hasn't left the Sapphire Palace since her arrival. But as for invitations, she hasn't responded to any of them yet, at least not that I know of." Lillian shifted uncomfortably, realizing she hadn't been paying attention to Jeanette's social calendar at all, having been more focused on Athanasia's work schedule. Athanasia, however, seemed more intrigued by the answer than she expected. She had assumed Jeanette, being a princess and a newcomer to the imperial family, would be swept into the social whirlwind with ease. Instead, it seemed the girl was more withdrawn than anyone had expected. Lucas, who had been invited for tea during the princess's lunch break in the Emerald Palace, entered the room with a casual air. As he made his way toward the table, pouring tea with his usual calm grace, Athanasia's curiosity piqued again. Lucas, sensing her unspoken question, spoke first. "That thing, it had a couple of invitations," he said nonchalantly. "Though mostly from low-ranking nobles. She hasn't replied to any of them yet, and I don't think she plans to. She's not particularly interested in attending the gatherings of lesser nobility." Athanasia raised an eyebrow, her lips twisting into a slight smirk. "Low-ranking nobles?" she echoed, her voice laced with both interest and an almost sarcastic amusement. "So, she hasn't been invited to any of the high-profile events, then?" Her thoughts briefly flickered back to Jeanette's earlier arrival in the Sapphire Palace, her haughty demeanor, the way she'd looked down on those around her. It was no surprise she would turn up her nose at anything that didn't cater to her sense of importance. Lucas nodded, seemingly amused by Athanasia's reaction. Exactly. I suspect she'd prefer the attention of more influential individuals, he said with a playful grin. But it seems she hasn't bothered to respond to anyone yet. Perhaps she's waiting for something more grand. Athanasia chuckled softly at Lucas's observation. I wonder how she's handling it, she mused aloud, her voice tinged with a faint edge of irony. It seemed strange to her, Jeanette, who had been so quick to assert her superiority, now finding herself out of the spotlight while Athanasia was swept into the center of it. As Athanasia reviewed the mountain of invitations before her, she carefully cross-referenced them with her and her father's packed schedule. Most of their time was consumed by court meetings, discussions on state affairs, and paperwork, leaving little room for personal engagements. After a moment of thought, she turned to her father, who was lounging on his chair, seemingly indifferent to the politics of high society. Daddy, she called out, gaining his attention. Can I host a tea party in the palace? And maybe a dinner at the Emerald Palace? Claude barely glanced up from the documents he was lazily skimming through. I don't see why not, he replied nonchalantly. Who are they to order you around? His tone was dismissive, as if the aristocrats vying for her attention were nothing more than pests buzzing around him and his daughter. Encouraged, Athanasia pressed on. Then, can I invite all the girls who made their debut alongside me this year? She asked sweetly, tilting her head slightly. Claude waved a hand lazily. It's up to you. That was all the permission she needed. Without wasting any time, Athanasia summoned her former etiquette teacher, Countess Eloise, for guidance. The Countess, a refined woman with decades of experience navigating noble society, arrived promptly, greeting the princess with a knowing smile. Perceptive as ever, Princess, Countess Eloise said, nodding approvingly. Most young ladies don't even give a thought to what activities they will host at their parties. They focus only on appearances and frivolities. What kind of gathering do you have in mind? Athanasia hesitated for a moment before responding. I was hoping to better understand the noble family's backgrounds, she admitted. But I don't want to come across as a snob by only focusing on high-ranking individuals. I'd like everyone to talk freely about state affairs and business opportunities. She shifted slightly in her seat, wondering if such a gathering was even possible within the strict boundaries of high society. Countess Eloise studied her thoughtfully. She had expected that, given the princess's limited exposure to noble society before her debut, Athanasia would be somewhat out of touch with the latest trends and politics. However, rather than seeing this as a flaw, the Countess saw it as an opportunity to shape the princess's image in high society from the ground up. After all, Lillian, the princess's guardian, was more concerned with her safety and personal well-being than with social status, and Claude himself had no patience for aristocratic games. That left a perfect opening for the Countess to step in as an advisor on these matters. How about hosting a salon, Princess? The Countess suggested with a knowing smile. A salon? Athanasia repeated, tilting her head. What's that? It's a type of social gathering where the main focus is conversation, mainly for information gathering and networking, the Countess explained. If you want to understand the inner workings of noble families, this would be a good place to start. Rather than a small tea party, think of it as an exclusive gathering for your peers, like an after-party for the debutante ball. Athanasia's eyes lit up with interest. That sounds perfect, she said. Although I don't really know the trends in high society. She openly admitted her lack of awareness, but rather than feeling embarrassed, she saw it as something she could overcome. Countess Eloise chuckled at the princess's straightforwardness. You don't have to worry about that, princess. If you're uncertain about following trends, why not set your own? A princess of your status can influence what others consider fashionable. Athanasia considered the idea. That's an interesting thought. But I should do something to leave a good impression, right? The Countess nodded. Yes. To maximize the impact of your first salon, I recommend preparing gifts for your guests. A thoughtful token will set the tone for future gatherings. Athanasia smiled as an idea formed in her mind. How about handmade embroidered handkerchiefs, she suggested. Something personal, rather than just expensive trinkets. Countess Eloise's expression brightened with approval. That would be wonderful, Princess. It's elegant, thoughtful, and unique. A handcrafted gift from the imperial princess herself, high society will adore the sentiment. Athanasia nodded in satisfaction. Then it's settled. I'll start preparing the invitations right away. As the meeting concluded, the countess left, pleased with the princess's initiative. Meanwhile, Athanasia felt a newfound excitement. Unlike the shallow, empty social gatherings she had imagined, this salon had the potential to be something meaningful, a place where she could observe, learn, and subtly shape the very world she was stepping into. Athanasia sat at her vanity, reviewing the plans for her upcoming salon. The event was set for an afternoon gathering, and the anticipation was beginning to settle in. She knew her first salon had to make a lasting impression, not just with her ideas, but with her appearance as well. She thought about the dress she wanted to wear, elegant yet comfortable, something that would reflect the refined nature of the occasion while allowing her to feel at ease. Father will be busy with his court affairs, but I can't let this slip through the cracks, she muttered to herself, flipping through sketches of various dresses she had been considering. She paused at one, a design that felt more like her than any other. Determined, she called for a tailor to come to the palace. Not long after, a soft knock echoed on her door. Enter. The door creaked open, and a woman dressed in fine yet practical attire stepped inside. Her name was Lady Marcel, a highly sought-after designer known for creating stunning yet wearable garments. Athanasia had seen her work at various events, but today, the princess would be the one to wear her creations. Your Highness, Lady Marcel greeted with a respectful bow, her warm smile ever present. How may I assist you today? Athanasia studied the designer for a moment before speaking. I need something that balances elegance and comfort. The dress should be perfect for a spring gathering, something that captures the delicate beauty of the season but is easy to wear. It must make a statement, yet allow me to move freely. Lady Marcel nodded, already sensing the princess's vision. I understand completely. A dress that breathes with the season, light and airy yet elegant. Would you like a suggestion, Your Highness? Athanasia smiled, appreciating the designer's intuitive understanding. I would. But I also have a specific idea in mind. Please, share it with me, Lady Marcel encouraged, ready to translate Athanasia's vision into fabric and thread. Athanasia hesitated for a moment, remembering Jeanette's distinct preferences. She had always favored pastels and earth tones, dresses that were full of ruffles and bows, excessive and youthful, almost like a birthday cake. But Athanasia knew that her own taste leaned more toward simplicity, more mature, but still youthful enough to suit a spring gathering. I imagine a dress with a voluminous, layered skirt, something soft and flowy, but with a bit of structure. The hem should fall just above the knee, Athanasia explained, her fingers tracing the air as she described her vision. I want it to feel like a breeze on a spring afternoon, light but with layers to give it depth. Lady Marcel's eyes sparkled. Royal blue and ivory, perhaps? Rich and delicate, a color scheme that suits you perfectly. Athanasia nodded. Exactly. The bodice should be a corset-style top in deep blue, with delicate silver embroidery, stars, crescent moons. I want to feel celestial, like I belong in the heavens. And for the sleeves, a sweetheart neckline with off-the-shoulder puffed sleeves, made from sheer ivory fabric. A satin ribbon bow at the waist for a finishing touch. The designer smiled as she wrote down the details, her fingers moving quickly over her notes. A dress fit for a princess, indeed, she mused. And for the skirt, layered and puffy, with cascading ruffles to add movement, soft, translucent overlays to shimmer in the light. Yes, exactly like that, Athanasia agreed with a smile. Something that moves with me, yet holds its shape with elegance. The dress should sparkle when I move, but not in a gaudy way. subtle, like a whisper. Lady Marcel nodded, her eyes narrowing with focus. I will ensure it fits perfectly. The shoes will be ivory lace-up heels, embellished with silver to match the embroidery. It will be an ensemble that catches the eye without overpowering your presence. Athanasia felt a sense of satisfaction settling within her. This dress would be the perfect combination of elegance and comfort, and it would certainly leave a lasting impression. Thank you, Lady Marcel, Athanasia said graciously. I look forward to seeing it come together. The designer gave a respectful bow. I will begin immediately, Your Highness. It will be ready in time for your event. As word of Athanasia's salon invitation spread throughout high society, nobles from the capital were abuzz with excitement. Invitations to such events were coveted, as they presented the perfect opportunity for young ladies to make connections, gain favor with the princess, and possibly secure advantageous marriages. The capital's elite had long prided themselves on their polished social skills, but this gathering promised something new, a salon where topics of state affairs and business could take center stage rather than the usual idle chatter about fashion and scandal. In the grand drawing rooms of noble houses, the reaction to the invitation was mixed. Some families immediately set their daughters to work, determining the most appropriate outfits for the event, while others debated the implications of attending such an affair hosted by the imperial family. My dear, this could be the perfect chance to gain favor with the princess, Lady Aurelia said to her daughter, Isolde, as she read the invitation aloud in their sunlit parlor. You should attend, and make sure you speak intelligently about the state of trade with the southern kingdoms. It would do well to position yourself as someone who is informed, not just a decorative piece. Isolde, a young woman with sharp features and raven-dark hair, nodded. Of course, mother. But do you think the princess will appreciate it if I speak of trade, or would it be better to discuss the upcoming ball at Garnet Palace? Something more, light-hearted? Lady Aurelia chuckled. Leave the light-hearted nonsense to the others. I am certain the princess will appreciate a young lady who speaks with substance. Not far from them, at the lavish estate of Duke Roderick, his daughter Seraphina was having a very different conversation. Seraphina had always prided herself on her impeccable manners and beauty, but she knew that this gathering would be a test of more than just her looks. I don't understand, Seraphina said, glancing at her mother with furrowed brows. Why is the princess hosting this event? It sounds far too political. I thought a salon was meant to be a gathering of the mind, but this sounds more like a meeting of merchants. Her mother, Lady Roderick, gave her a calculating look. You are right to be cautious. But don't forget that Athanasia is a princess now. She is trying to carve out her place in society. Whether she speaks of trade or state affairs, it is important that you show up, express your opinions, and, most importantly, stay in her good graces. We never know when these connections might prove useful. Meanwhile, far from the capital in the sprawling, ever-expanding sapphire palace, Jeanette sat in her chambers, staring at the elegant invitation in her hands. Unlike the noble girls of the capital, she had never been particularly focused on social politics. In fact, she often felt out of place in such refined environments. Yet, this invitation to her half-sister's salon intrigued her. She had always found Athanasia distant, cold even, but something about the idea of attending her salon made her curious. Perhaps it was her chance to make an impression on the other nobles in the capital, or perhaps it was simply the intrigue of participating in something that was being talked about so much. Margaret, she called to her head maid, who had just entered the room with a quiet knock. I need a dress, something suitable for the event. Something, pastel, with ribbons and ruffles. You know what I like. Margaret, the head maid, gave a small, obedient nod. At once, Your Highness. But before she could leave, Jeanette paused. She thought for a moment, then quickly added, and make sure it's extravagant. I want to stand out. As Margaret turned to leave, Jeanette's eyes lingered on the invitation, a mix of excitement and uncertainty passing through her gaze. Her half-sister's salon would be different from anything she had experienced before. Perhaps this was her chance to show everyone, including Athanasia, that she was more than just the forgotten daughter of the emperor. Meanwhile, Lucas, the young magician who had been living in the Sapphire Palace for years, overheard the conversation and frowned. As a gifted magic prodigy, Lucas was no stranger to the complex dynamics of the imperial family, nor to the politics of high society. He had lived at the Sapphire Palace ever since the emperor had taken notice of his talent, and now, at the age of 14, his power was undeniable. He often conversed with both the emperor and the princesses, and yet, Jeanette's lack of awareness of the palace's practical needs never failed to frustrate him. He had been walking past when Margaret called out to him. "Master Lucas," she said, her voice filled with a mix of desperation and hope. "Do you think we should ask His Majesty for more funds? We need something special for Jeanette's dress for the salon." Lucas turned, his ruby-like eyes narrowing with disapproval. His appearance had changed since his younger days. His once long, flowing black hair had been trimmed short, revealing the sharp angles of his face. His features were more defined, his presence commanding. "You're forgetting something, Margaret," Lucas began, his tone firm. "The Emperor's banquet is coming up soon. Do you really want to ask him for additional funds right now? What will you say to the foreign dignitaries when they arrive? The Sapphire Palace is a residence for Empire guests, not a personal palace for the princesses." Margaret flinched, lowering her head in apology. "Of course, Master Lucas. My mistake." Lucas's gaze softened slightly, but his words remained sharp. "We don't need to impress anyone with excessive luxury. Just give it a dress that's within the palace's budget. We don't need to please someone who has no real position in court. It's only recently been acknowledged as the emperor's daughter, but it's done little to earn the respect of others." Margaret nodded, understanding the unspoken reality. Despite Jeanette's status as the emperor's daughter, she had never held any true power in the palace, and no one treated her like a princess in the Sapphire Palace. It was Lucas who was respected, for he had the emperor's ear, not Jeanette, who spent her days lounging and neglecting her royal responsibilities. "Yes, Master Lucas," Margaret replied obediently. "I'll work within the budget." "Good," Lucas said, his gaze distant as he turned to leave. "Let the nobles squabble over appearances. At the end of the day, it's the one with power who matters." Margaret watched him walk away, pondering the stark differences between the two sisters. Athanasia had the potential to command respect, while Jeanette still had much to prove. Like, comment and subscribe to be notified for updates in the series.